Miss Trina, Pitbull, let's show 'em how we get down. I bought it like a rock star, look like a...
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the MGT podcast. Today, we are joined by former MLB All-Star Bronson Arroyo. How's it going, Bronson?
Going good. Can't complain. I'm in lockdown like you guys over here in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Good old lovely Cincinnati. First off, how has quarantine kind of affected how you go about things? If there is any, activities that you've been, picking up, or things that you've done more or less of, just how are you keeping yourself busy?
Yeah, it's got me. It's got me playing less music shows. I've been playing music since probably I was in AA with the Pirates back in 1999. I picked up guitar when I was 23. And slowly, especially after retirement, I've been playing more and more shows around town and in New England sometimes. But so all that's been shut down, but it's given me the ability to play a lot of golf. So I've been out on the golf course, just being out in open air and nature and seeing if you can grind on that game a little bit, which is just tough. It's a never-ending game of trying to make adjustments, kind of like pitching. But for whatever reason, I don't have the same feel out on the golf course, so it's been difficult.
Yeah, can't really say I'm too much of a pro myself. I can't speak for the rest of these guys, but golfing is not easy.
No, it's really tough. I mean, the adjustments are so slight, and I liken it a lot to, just like feel the baseball coming out of your hand. And I watched the guys throughout my career struggle with command, and it didn't really resonate with me because it came easy to me. But now that I'm playing a lot more golf and realizing how hard it is to hit a 50-yard chip shot that should be so simple, it's amazing to realize that, technique and kind of consistency inside of your pre-shot routine and all that kind of stuff matters so much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a game of inches. There's actually, it's kind of similar to baseball, in that, everything is really precise and it's all about command and control, and you gotta really be on top of what you're doing, and, just basic stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm finding that what I did well on the mound and what kept me in the game for such a long time is really hard to duplicate in other parts of your life, right? Like even playing music. I was playing a little show for the neighborhood here the other day because nobody had been out of the house in a couple of months, and so it was a big open field and a couple hundred people came, and I just sat there with an acoustic guitar, and I'm not used to playing by myself all the time. Usually it's a full band, and the hardest thing to do in high pressure situations, and what allowed me to stay in the game for such a long time, was that I had the ability to stand on the mound in front of 40,000 people in big situations and control my adrenaline, control the ability to not let, the emotion take over and keep cool about me, and also draw back. So pitch less hard, right? A lot of guys, when the moment is big, they want to go as hard as they can. And a lot of times that's what gets us beat. While playing the guitar and playing golf, a lot of times in those high pressure situations, it's hard for me to relax and play like I'm playing around the campfire, or hit that same chip shot like you're hitting it on the range. And I could do that baseball-wise very naturally. But with these other things that are coming down the pipe now, you realize that it's a challenge to try to control your mind and your emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know all of us have prepared a couple of questions. I guess we'll kick it off. Who'd like to go first? Logan, you might want to unmute yourself. There you go.
I probably do want to do that. I can go. The first thing I wanted to say is I really do like your music, by the way. And, is there anybody in your life that kind of inspired you, or like a specific band or artist that inspired you to pursue music?
I always lean on Pearl Jam a lot. Eddie Vedder was the guy that has been my favorite since I was probably 14 or 15 when that first record came out. I don't know if that's what really inspired me to play the music, though. It's hard to say. I was in the weight room as a young kid listening to music with my father all the time. And the radio would always be on, and my father was in bands in high school, and everyone in my family played a musical instrument. They were playing the piano, they were singing around the house, they were playing the violin. There was always music in the house, but I didn't really partake in it too much. I was kind of always just absorbing and listening. It wasn't until the stuff out of Seattle came alive, which was Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden. There was something inside of that music that felt a little more real to me. It didn't feel like it was happy-go-lucky or conjured. It felt like it was coming from a place that was more authentic. to, you know, the person writing it. And so for whatever reason, I started to dive into music a little bit more then. And I found myself humming along in the shower or trying to sing in the car a little bit more. And then it was just somebody giving me an acoustic guitar that really kind of sparked the marriage of those two things. My interest was being piqued by the stuff that was coming out on the radio. And then somebody gave me an acoustic guitar at 22. And that really was kind of the thing that drove it. But as I was starting to play, what I really wanted to hear myself perform was those songs. So it was those bands I named, plus, you know, Oasis, you know, a lot of the bands from the mid to late 90s was really where I kind of found that ground. And then I started working backwards into Tom Petty, into the Beatles, into Bruce Springsteen, and other older acts.
Yeah, it's awesome. Now, as Liam mentioned before, you were an All-Star. How is it like in All-Star weekend, like being there, like with all the other stars or whatever? Can you describe that experience?
Yeah, it was. I only went the one time in 06. You know, you got to get off to a good start in Major League Baseball to make an All-Star team. There's a lot of guys that if you look at the end of the season and look at their stats and see the guys that were on the All-Star team, a lot of times they don't match up, because a lot of times guys will have a really great start but not such a good second half. I happen to be a guy who most of the time got off to a pretty slow start and usually had a really strong August and September. And I might end up 15-11 with a 3.8 ERA, but early on in the year I looked like I was getting killed. So I only had the opportunity to make that one All-Star, but it was really unique. It was definitely fun. I had been around the game long enough. I was mature enough. I was 28, 29 years old, and I had won a World Series and played on that Red Sox team with so many stars that it wasn't overwhelming for me. But even then, sometimes you get in those situations, you feel like, you know, it's a little bit of a fish out of water. You could feel like you're the new kid at school sometimes when you walk into a locker room and there's Albert Pujols and Jimmy Rollins and, you know, all these studs. But I did feel like I belonged there that year, and I was kind of blossoming as a pitcher. I was coming to a bad team from a good team, going from the Red Sox to the Cincinnati Reds, who had lost, hadn't won the division in a long time. So I felt like I was coming into my own. But it was a great weekend. Home Run Derby was fantastic. You know, just the ability to see guys like Ichiro Suzuki and Vladimir Guerrero. I remember, you know, at the All-Star game, everybody's kind of on their own. So your transportation to and from the field, all the limousines in the town are used up. It's hard to find places, you know, people that will come pick you up and stuff, and they've got all the roads blocked off around the stadium. So I left the game around the 7th inning, I think. I pitched the 5th inning, and I left the stadium, and I saw Ichiro jump in his car, and he left. And then I find Vladimir Guerrero and one of his buddies, like under this little overhang with all their bags, just trying to hide from people. And they didn't have a ride. They couldn't get anybody to come in. It was like this before Uber, you know, you couldn't get any taxis to come in. So luckily I found him, and I had a guy picking me up. And so we threw Vladdy and his buddy in the car and got them where they needed to go. But it was a great weekend, and something that I look back upon that was, you know, kind of once in a lifetime.
That's super cool. I've always wanted to go. Rory, do you want to go next year?
Sure. So my question is, like, who inspired you most to play baseball? Like, who did you model your game after?
Well, you know, it's funny. I thought I was going to be a big league shortstop, right? I mean, I was a very athletic kid at a young age. You know, by the time I was 5 or 6, it was the first year I was playing t-ball, and I could backhand the ball and throw it across the infield like a 10-year-old. And that was an observation my father made, and was like, wow, I'll put him in the weight room and make him a little bit stronger. Maybe I'll get him a free education in college. And so, you know, early on, I didn't have somebody before I played the game that inspired me. But by the time I was 7, I looked in my glove, and I had seen Ozzie Smith from the St. Louis Cardinals doing those backflips, and they called him the Wizard of Oz. And that was my favorite player. And then I looked at my glove, and the glove was actually signed by Ozzie. It was a cheap glove, but it was an Ozzie Smith model of a glove from who knows where, you know, Kmart or something. And so that became my favorite guy. And so growing up, all the way even into my mid-years of high school, I thought I'd be a big league shortstop. I thought I'd be drafted as a shortstop. But then as I became 16, 17, and 18, my body started growing a little bit more. I got taller and lankier, and on the mound, I was just more projectable as a pitcher. So I probably would have been drafted as a shortstop, but I was drafted in the 3rd round as a pitcher. I probably would have been drafted in the 30th round as a shortstop. And it would have been a much harder road to the major leagues, because I think I would have been a guy who probably fielded the ball very well and played great defense, but hitting would have been probably so-so. I wouldn't have had great power. I probably would have been one of those guys hitting 240 every year and probably been like a backup who played great defense. So that was really my childhood hero and who inspired me to play the game for sure.
Cool. Anyone want to go next?
Yeah. Is there one pitch that you threw in your career that like you couldn't like, those pitches where you get them so bad you can't help but like smile? Like, what was like your favorite one of those?
Like where you dominated somebody to the point where you were kind of laughing on the mound. Where
Yeah.
I think there was some right-handed hitters that had a very difficult time hitting my curveball. Right. I pretty much made my living off of my breaking ball. I was a guy who threw 86 to 90 miles an hour, but what kept me in the game for such a long time was the ability to throw a curveball at 78 miles an hour like this, but then also throw it 78 like that, and then throw it at 68 like this, right? And so the ability to change speeds and also change the angles on my breaking ball with an extreme amount of command, being able to throw for strikes whenever I wanted on both sides of the plate is what kept me there. So guys like Alfonso Soriano, some real free swinging power hitters who were right-handed matchups for me sometimes were just, I had them totally overmatched. I remember it was probably 2001. I was pitching for the Pirates at the time, and I was standing in the stadium. We were playing the Cardinals, and back then it was a real struggle for me to really command the game because I wasn't comfortable at the big league level. But we're playing the Cardinals, and I was feeling pretty good that day. And Mark McGwire was, as big as anything in the game at the time. And he was standing at the plate, and he was such a free swinger. I was just throwing him breaking balls 2 feet outside, and he was just swinging and missing. And, it was almost like playing wiffle ball where you're getting free outs. But on the flip side of that coin, there's always guys who have your number, and you just can't get them out no matter what you throw.
Yeah, exactly. And then what was your favorite moment from your career?
I'd say my favorite moment personally, I mean, as team-wise, it's hard to beat winning the World Series with the Red Sox. But I'd say the 2 moments that stand out the most for me, just from my own personal standpoint, was probably 2 outings. One would have been start against the Anaheim Angels, Game 3 of the ALDS in 2004. I think I went into the 7th inning. I think like 6 1/3, gave up 1 run. We wound up clinching the series that night. And then the second one was beating Bumgarner 9-0 in the playoffs in 2012 against the Giants out there. I had a no-hitter going into the 7th, I think. So those 2 starts, you only get an opportunity to pitch in the playoffs so many times. Sometimes you never. And I got to toe the rubber as a starter in the playoffs 4 or 5 times in my career, come out of the bullpen quite a few times. And 3 of those 4 starts that I had were really, really solid. And those 2 stand out to me as just, it's a culmination of 8 months of work. You've been thinking about this for the whole season. You get out there on the mound, and sometimes you just don't have your best stuff. And even when you feel good in the bullpen, sometimes you don't have your best stuff. So those 2 nights, I warmed up in the bullpen. I felt strong. And when the game started, I felt strong and I had good stuff. And the marriage of those 2 things don't happen all the time. And it was very, it was a fantastic feeling to be out there on the mound, knowing that you were dominating a game in the biggest of moments, all the work you'd put in that whole season to try to prepare for that.
Yeah, those are both very good moments. And then my last question would be, when like you're saying you had a no-hitter into the 7th, do you like know during the game that you have a no-hitter? Like, is that in the back of your head, or do you just try to like kind of play it off like you don't have anything going?
I'd say probably after the 5th or the 6th inning, you definitely know it. People start acting a little funny. I threw a perfect game in 2003 for the Pawtucket Red Sox. There's only been 4 perfect games in the Pacific Coast League in 130 or 40 years. So it's more rare in that league than it was in the major leagues. And I threw one there in 2003. And after, and I probably had a no-hitter after the 6th inning, maybe 5 times in my career, something like that. And what happens is that it a little bit, but then people start treating you so strange. They won't talk to you and they won't look at you, and they're not having the same interaction they normally do with you. And you notice guys are doing the same patterns and same routines, and you can just feel the avoidance. You can tell they're trying to stay away from you. And so all that kind of combined, and you're realizing that you've also seen the same batters in the same innings, right? So a lot of times, especially if you have a perfect game, you're seeing the first batter at the start of the 4th inning, which doesn't happen a whole lot. So as all those things are kind of syncing up, you're becoming aware of it. And, you know, you try to just push it off. But the day I threw that perfect game, you could only push it off until the 9th inning. Once I got through the 8th inning and you knew you had only 3 outs left to go, then it was kind of this surge of emotion. And it was, you know, that was probably the most nervous I've ever been on a mound, was trying to close out the 9th inning of a perfect game, even though it was in AAA, only because the fans were so into the game and you felt like you were going to let them down if you gave up a hit or something.
Yeah, that's awesome. Does anyone else have anything?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. So my first one is, can you kind of speak a little bit on coming back after your Tommy John surgery and kind of maybe what you learned through your experiences getting through the minors again? And if there was, you know, any teammates specifically that were a big help to you during that process? Yeah,
for me, it was, you know, I had 2 surgeries at the same time, actually. It was weird. I had the Tommy John. I had been pitching for the Diamondbacks that year, and my shoulder was hurting the whole season. And I never had a cortisone shot before. I got a cortisone shot about 3 or 4 starts into the season in my shoulder for the first time, just thinking it was some sort of irritation, not knowing I had a tear in that as well. And so, but the cortisone kind of quieted that pain down. So then I went out and I was pitching well, and I threw a complete game and beat Steven Strasburg at home about 8, I think maybe 6 starts in. And then I wind up throwing 8 more starts with my ligament tore in my elbow and the shoulder tore both. And as I was going down that road, my velocity was continuing to dip further and further down, and I was getting more and more in pain, but I was winning baseball games. So I just kept going out there. They were trying to pull me out of the game, but I just said, hey, just leave me in here, man. I'm 37 years old. You guys are paying me $11.5 million to pitch. Like, just let me pitch. So they said, okay. So I continued to pitch until the arm just wouldn't take it anymore. I mean, I could barely reach the plate. I beat Josh Beckett 2-1 in Dodger Stadium on that last start. I threw 75 to 79 miles an hour in the first inning, and Kirk Gibson was my manager. And he said, Bronson, I need to get you out of the game. And I said, why? And he said, you haven't even thrown 80 miles an hour yet. So I said, don't worry about it. It's my last start. Just leave me in here. So I went 5 innings, gave up 1 run, and wound up winning the game 2-1. But right after it, I realized I had no ligament in my elbow, and my shoulder needed to be sewn back together. So I had those 2 things at the same time, and it was a long time for me to come back, and I never got 100% healthy. It was 2.5 years of grinding, just wanting to pitch again. And I got back and pitched 14 times for the Reds. But in the process, what I really realized about it was the fact that what you're given from birth is so fantastic in your body that it's very difficult to change out parts or to sew up a hole and fix things and come back just as powerful and just as healthy. The shoulder was never the same again, ever. The elbow bothered me all the way up to the end as well. Now, there's a lot of guys who have Tommy John and just Tommy John and never really have problems with the elbow, but I never got completely pain-free. I pitched all 14 starts with the Reds feeling not very good. And in the process, you know, you realize what a long haul it was, how hard it was to come back, and also that had this happened to me early in my career when I was 25 or 26, it might have put an end to my career, really. You know, I was very fortunate that I didn't get hurt for the first 19 and a half years that I pitched, which was very rare in the game. And you know, it's one of the blessings of my career is that I wasn't a hard thrower, but maybe because of that, I didn't break down as quickly as most guys, which gave me the opportunity to prove that I could be a frontline starter in the major leagues, not throwing 95 miles an hour. And so, you know, it was a hard process. I would never wish that upon anybody, especially early in their career. But I got through it. I came back. I was leading the team in wins in 2017, and then the shoulder just wasn't going to take it anymore. I slowly started sliding downhill and getting beat up physically and getting beat on the mound. So I just pulled the plug on it. I wanted some of the younger guys to get the opportunity to go out there and pitch, and I was just going to sit and watch for the last 3 months and kind of be a mentor and just allow those guys to take all the information out of my brain that they could before I retired.
That's amazing. Couple more questions. My first one is, can you kind of speak on what it's like to be in a World Series atmosphere and the effect that had on you over the course of the rest of your career?
Yeah, the World Series atmosphere was, I mean, as you can imagine, electric. But, you know, playing in Boston in 2003 when I got there from the Pirates and losing to the Yankees that year when Aaron Boone hit that home run in extra innings off of Tim Wakefield, that rivalry inside of there, even regular season games, and just being in Fenway Park's atmosphere every day really prepared you for the playoffs. It's one of the few places in the game where it felt like a playoff game every night. even if it was a Tuesday afternoon makeup game against the Orioles and they were in last place in the division, the intensity of the media and the fans wanting the Red Sox to win so badly, it made you walk on eggshells and made you feel like you were in a playoff game every night. And so I got a whole season of that being prepared leading into that 04 season. So by the time we got to the Yankees in the ALCS in 04, you were used to the atmosphere. You had kind of your program set down, how it would be, how you would prepare yourself for those types of situations, how you would pitch in September when the atmosphere was much cooler, when there was no humidity in the air. How are you going to grab this baseball? There's all these little nuances about the game that you needed to prepare for, and 03 did that for me. So, in the World Series, it wasn't overwhelming, especially by the time we took the lead against the Cardinals in Game 1 and Game 2. It started to feel a little bit actually less pressurized than that Yankee series. So, but I think the way that it helped me later on was when I got to the National League and the Reds in 06, that first year I was an All-Star. There was half that year that I felt like I was pitching against like AAA teams, because I was so used to facing the American League East with all these bombers in the lineup, and also the ninth hitter was the designated hitter and not the pitcher. So I get over to the National League. They haven't seen me in quite a few years, and my breaking ball is a little bit different now than it was before, and I'm more confident as a pitcher. I'm a little bit stronger. I'm throwing just a tick harder, and now I feel like I'm myself. And so that first year in the National League, I kind of breezed through the first half, and part of that was the fact that mentally I had been under duress for so long in a Red Sox uniform that now some of these lineups felt like I had some breathing room in them. And so it definitely helped me, as years went on. But then staying in the National League longer and longer, and then you find teams like the Cardinals grinding you out, and Albert Pujols being in the box 19 times a year, and you found those situations just as difficult. So sometimes, I felt that way in 06, and then that kind of waned as time went by.
Yeah, absolutely. My last question was, I hear all the time that you shouldn't talk to pitchers on the day that they're pitching. Were there any superstitions that you had in your career, or did you notice that you were any different around your teammates on the day that you were pitching?
Yeah, I purposely was not any different from that standpoint. When Curt Schilling got to the Red Sox that first year, he was one of those guys that you weren't supposed to talk to on the day he pitched, and he was doing that throughout spring training of 04. But we had such a wild locker room, and Kevin Millar was such a pot stirrer, and he was not going to shut up with his mouth. So he basically just beat Schilling down, and to the point where like a month into the season, Schilling's playing like spades and cards with the guys the day he pitched, and he loosened up a lot more. The locker room was it was really hard to try to be isolated like that in a locker room like it was in Red Sox 04-05, because it was just too much personality going around. But regular superstitions that I would have had getting prepared for a game, there's so many that I would have a hard time explaining them all here. It would be everything from the time you woke up to what you ate for breakfast to what you watched on TV that day, what time you went to the park, when you put your uniform on. I would take a nap before the game. Usually at 5:30, I would take a nap for a half hour. Then it would take me an hour to get prepared for the game. The music you would listen to while you're getting stretched by the strength coach. I listened to a Pearl Jam song called Indifference my entire career. I would have certain foods down in the tunnel with me when I would sit. I never sat up in the dugout my whole career. I sat down in the tunnel because when it was hot outside, it was cooler down there. When it was cold outside, it was warmer down there. Plus, I didn't want the camera on me in between innings. I wanted the ability to eat food and kind of prepare myself in the way I wanted to without eyes on me. It made it a little bit more relaxed. If I really, really went through a day, there's just so many you can't remember. And those superstitions, what happens is if you have success with some of these small things, you just start putting them in your repertoire because it makes you feel whole, it makes you feel good. You only get to pitch 32 times a year as a major league starter usually. And if your whole life is dependent on 32 starts, you want to feel as good as you can every time. And so you start building in these things that then become superstitions, and you feel kind of naked if you don't do them. But I definitely was never the guy who said, don't talk to me. I was joking in the locker room. I was exactly the same as I was on any other day until about 5:30. And then I would take the nap, and then you would get a little bit more kind of focused and start kind of like your peripheral vision would come to here, and you'd be taking care of your body and stretching and making sure how things felt. And if people wanted to joke with you, then you would kind of like ignore it, and people knew that about most starters. You kind of leave them alone on the day they pitch. But for me, I definitely wasn't a guy who was going to snap at somebody or get irritated if they asked me a question, you know, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody have any more questions?
Yeah, I have one more. So the years that your ERA was lower, did you do anything different when you were pitching?
No, I think that the ERA was just a culmination of, you know, how it's just a broad overview of how your season went. You know, I think if I go back and look at how I pitched in the first few years, I'd say 2000, 2001, 2002, 2000, and probably those first 3 years in the big leagues and all through the minor leagues underneath that for 7 years, you'd see one style of pitcher. And then from 03 on, you'd start seeing little things being added. So I threw a lot of four-seam fastballs. I didn't throw a lot of sinkers or changeups back before 03. And even in 03 and 04, I didn't throw a lot of that. But as 05, 06, 07 start coming, your body starts changing a little bit, and you pick up a pitch from somebody. You pick up a grip from one of your teammates who throws a really good sinker or a changeup, and you start messing with these things, playing flat ground on your normal days that you're just playing catch. And what happens is you start taking some of that into the game, and you go, oh, I can cut that ball a little bit. I didn't realize I could do that to lefties. And then, you know, because as years go on, they're studying you on film, and everyone gets to understand how it is that you're being successful, and they're trying to pick you apart. So you've got to make adjustments to their adjustments, right? And so I'd say my ERA is probably just indicative mostly of how most of my seasons went. I would say the 1 year that my ERA, I had a 3.29 in 06, and I really dominated the game that year. I think I had a sub-3 for most of that season, and I had the most strikeouts I ever had. That one is real reflective of how dominant I was that year. Other than that, there's some seasons that I felt that I threw the ball really well and probably had a higher ERA than I want. And then there's some seasons where I ended up with a 3.8 ERA, and I didn't feel that strongly about the campaign I put up. So, you know, a lot of times you can give up 10 runs in one inning, you can really blow your ERA out of proportion for a while. And there's sometimes that you can pitch really bad and have one error and makes all those runs unearned. And so numbers can be deceiving at times. But if I went season by season and told you how I felt throughout, I wouldn't even have to look at the ERA, and I could probably tell you I think that was a B+ season, and it would probably be reflective of the ERA in the end.
Cool.
Yeah, baseball is such a game of numbers now with all the advanced metrics and everything. And, I mean, it's just crazy how much the game has progressed from an analytical standpoint in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, now you've got guys – I mean, you have a lot of coaches in the game that I talk to now. I just played golf with Billy Hatcher 2 days ago, and he's now with the Marlins coaching first base. And, you know, it's always a process for these guys who played back in the 80s and the 90s. They're now having to relearn a whole system because these organizations want them to understand not only, you know, baseball skill as we had in the past with just what their eyes tell them, but they want to be able to corroborate that on paper with statistics. And the merging of those two things has really come into the forefront of the game. And it's still a bit controversial with some people thinking that organizations either lean one way, too heavy or too light on the statistics.
Yeah, absolutely. Any last questions?
You can go, Logan.
Everyone's got one.
I was gonna say, during the course of your career, did you feel like the talent kind of started progressing? Because you see, things now, like people hitting farther than they did before. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Did you see a progression in skill as you went through your career, or was that non-existent?
No, I think there's always a shift and an evolution in sports. And, you know, one of the great debates has always been, you know, how would the Yankees from, 1929 fare against, the Boston Red Sox in 2013, or, how are the Steelers, how would they fare against, the best teams in the NFL now, the Patriots or whatever. And I generally take the standpoint that sports never goes backwards, right? And if you look at track and field, it's the one thing that gives us concrete evidence that the fastest runners are still in modern day the highest jumpers, right? If you have concrete evidence, usually athletes are getting bigger and stronger all the time, and they're finding new ways to do things in a more efficient way. So I definitely felt like guys were getting bigger and stronger, hitting the ball further as seasons were going on. The one thing for me was that as I was getting a little older, I was starting to lose just a little bit of velocity, not a ton, but I never was a hard thrower. So I was now throwing, instead of throwing 88, 89, 90, I was throwing, 86 to 88, which wasn't a lot of velocity loss up in my high 30s, but now everyone was throwing 95. So my 87 looked really slow. What I was finding is that guys were getting so accustomed to hitting hard stuff that my slower breaking balls and stuff were actually giving people more fits than they would have in my heyday. And so I definitely felt the game had been evolving, but because I was kind of an outlier, I was a guy who pitched backwards, who pitched softer than most people, I felt like it actually gave me an advantage. And had I still been healthy and not had a torn shoulder, I feel like I could still do that to the guys now, because everybody now is seeing 95 to 100 with a hard slider. And there's very few guys who are throwing a soft breaking ball who can really make depth with their breaking pitches. And so I definitely think, though, the athleticism in the game, I mean, to see some of the plays that a guy like Ozzie Smith would have made in, let's say, 1980 or 1978 for the Padres, I mean, those were plays that were so astonishing. People had never seen anything like that before. There's plays being made like that every single night on every single ball club now, right? And the athleticism for the bigger athlete is just – it's going to continue to get better and better and better and better and better, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the older guys couldn't compete today's game. They would be able to, just like a golfer. You take Jack Nicklaus, there's no doubt in my mind, you give Jack the newer equipment, he would still be one of the greatest golfers of all time. In our era, it's just he played where he's hitting with a persimmon wood head. So, yeah, he was only driving the ball 280 yards, but had he used our modern equipment, he'd still be driving it 330 like all these other guys. So I think the best of the best have always risen. The cream is always rising to the top. And but it definitely I would never say that, hey, the 1980 World Series champs are a better ball club than the 2020 will be. You know what I mean? I think the sport's only evolved forward.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, I got 2 questions here. Who is the hardest guy to get out?
For most of my career, I'd say the 2 guys that were really, really difficult were Barry Bonds and Albert Pujols. And I didn't face Barry that much. I probably only faced him 10 times in my career, and most of them were when I was young with the Pirates. And then I got him a couple times at the end when I was with the Reds in 06 and 07. But, he had such a great eye. He never swung at anything out off the plate. And it seemed like every time he swung the bat, he just squared the ball up. And Albert's in that same ballpark. But Albert, I had to face him 19 times a year. We played the Cardinals so many times. It seemed like every time we were in a big position, he would be at the plate with 2 outs and 2 runners on in the 7th inning, and you're winning by a run in Busch Stadium. And somehow, some way, you're going to have to pitch to this guy. And, it just the mixture of being able to bat 300, hit 30 homers and drive in 100 RBIs, and possibly walk more times than you strike out, that combination just doesn't happen very often, and those guys are just impossible to pitch to.
Yeah, those are 2 all-time greats right there. And then my other question would be, what's your favorite food to eat, both on like days that you're pitching and days that you weren't pitching, like during the games? During the games.
Well, the day that I would pitch, the one thing that I would always have probably right at 6 o'clock, just before I would get ready to go out and start stretching, was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It was a mixture of some fat, some protein, a little bit of carb, something that wouldn't upset your stomach. It was kind of like the safe play, right? Also keep your blood sugar decently high because of the jelly. But on other days, if I was trying to like carbo load, I would probably eating pasta, or just some sort of clean meat like fish or steak or chicken with some greens, some broccoli. As the years went on, they started serving better and better food in the clubhouses. Back in my early years, you'd show up to the clubhouse and there was nothing but like a bowl of cereal or a Subway sandwich there, which you'd be absolutely shocked about these days. But as years went on, food has gotten better and better, and now they're serving, organic everything, and they got their own chefs in there, and it's fantastic. So we would kind of pick and choose, but the last few years, the stuff was so good, you could basically pick and choose from anything and feel like you were being fueled well.
Oh, that's awesome. Does anyone else have anything?
I had one final question. Looking at the game now, are there any young pitchers or young players in general that you feel like are like the most exciting, like the top tier that are going to just kind of take over the next few years?
Young guys, yeah. It's funny. I've been out of the game for the last – this would have been my 3rd year of not playing, and there's so many new guys. organizations are taking chances on younger and younger guys. When I was on that Red Sox team winning the World Series, the average age of that team was probably 31, 32. Now the average age of most ball clubs is 24, 25. And so teams are not only are players bigger and stronger faster, so they're getting to the big leagues quicker, but I think teams monetarily are willing to take a chance on some of these younger guys earlier because their talent, their potential talent is so overwhelming that they just get them to the big leagues quick. But I'm obviously Mike Trout, I feel like is still in his heyday. He's still in his prime, and I think he's going to dominate the game for the next 7 to 8 years. He's probably going to wind up being maybe the greatest player who ever played the game if he can stay healthy. Just because he has the ability to hit for average, he's got pop, but he also has legs underneath him. He can still steal bags and play defense in a way that a guy like Albert Pujols has not been able to for a long time. Other than Mike, I think everybody else that's gonna, Altuve was kind of in my thing, but he's probably at the very top, if not starting to come down the hill a little bit, even though he's pretty young. But just a real young talent. There's not a lot of guys that I would personally know or haven't watched enough baseball in the last couple of years to really tell you who's going to dominate the game in that fashion. It's even on the mound. The guys that I still think are the best in the game is still guys that are a bit older now. Max Scherzer, Clayton Kershaw, Zach Greinke, Chris Sale. Those guys I still feel like got the most mojo. I'd take them on the mound in a playoff game versus some of the young guys who have more electric stuff right now, just because the experience is there. The craftsmanship is there to be able to pick hitters apart in a different way. But it just takes some time to have enough experience in the game to where you feel like you can really dominate it. But there's no doubt there's going to be so many young guys coming up that are going to have just an explosiveness to them, whether it's speed or power, that I think the game is going to continue to keep moving forward. And it's like that commercial I don't know if you guys saw a commercial they put up in spring training. It was about 4 or 5 years ago, and Buck Showalter was the manager of the Orioles. And at the end of the commercial, he said, "These are the good old days." And, we look back upon things sometimes and think of our old days as the most fantastic times. But in sports, I think, the now and the present is the most important. And I think these are the good old days. You guys are going to see some good baseball from here on out.
I really hope so. And my final question was, looking at, the current status of the season, it's up in the air. I know they just announced a date to restart yesterday, but how do you foresee what do you foresee going for the season?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you said they put a date up yesterday, but I don't think the union and the players haven't agreed to
no, they haven't agreed on it yet, but
right, haven't agreed to it yet. Yeah. There's an inside part to the game of knowing of how the union works and how the history of the union has worked that makes me think that it's going to be, other than that 50-game forced season by the commissioner, it's going to be very difficult to get to where we want to be. The players agreed in March to prorated salaries, which mean if we played 70 games, you get paid for 70 games of what you would have made in 162. Or if you played 100 games, you get 100. You'd get prorated to the day. And the owners agreed to that. And then after the fact, now the owners want them to take even more off their salaries and a percentage. And it's definitely not going to happen. It's a can of worms that we can't afford to open up for future negotiations for a new collective bargaining agreement. So, it's going to be a hard road still to try to get over this hump. Even if they forced a 50-game schedule, I'm not so sure that some of the real big dogs might try not to play. Is it worth a guy like Clayton Kershaw cranking up his arm extra quick, getting ready in 2 or 3 weeks and trying to pitch in a 50-game schedule if he gets hurt and then you're going to miss maybe all of next year because of it? It could be a little dicey. So, there's a lot of variables in play. It seems like the owners, they never want to take a loss. It's like, they make all this money year after year after year after year in multiples of what any player in the game is making. And it seems like they never want to take a loss. And now that they know that maybe they're going to have to take a loss because fans won't be in the stands, they don't want to pay the guys. And so, it's unfortunate, but it's a fight that's constantly going on. And I don't know what's going to happen. I would love to watch baseball. I want to go down to the ballpark and clean the shoes with the clubhouse guys and pass out laundry and talk trash to Joey Votto. But I don't know if it's going to happen. So, I'm kind of on the outside just like you guys, and we'll wait and see what happens. But hopefully we'll get back at some point to playing the game, and it'd be really nice if we get some people in the crowd too, because it would be a daunting task to be out on the mound facing some of the best hitters in the game and not have any crowd there. In midsummer with the heat, it would be hard to play that way.
Yeah. All right. Anybody have any final questions? I know we asked that question about 10 times now, but no, everyone all set? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it. Everybody make sure to go check out the other episodes of the podcast on our YouTube channel. Any final words, Bronson?
No, man. Freaking hope we get baseball back soon, and we'll all be watching, and I guess go Red Sox, huh?
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day.